Okay, I hope I'm audible to all students who are attending this lecture of macroeconomics. We continue with our lectures on national income. And if all students can recall, we had done the first chapter in national income, which was Introduction to Macroeconomics. Then within the national income unit, we had done the second chapter, which was Circular Flow of Income and Product. And today in this lecture, we intend to start with the third chapter within the national income unit. This is based on measuring national income using the value added approach, or also called the product method or the net output method. So basically from this lecture onwards, we will be properly looking at the ways to measure national income. And the first method to measure national income is the product method or the value added method, also called the net output method. Now, before digging deeper into this topic, let us first understand some elementary concepts. Okay. So the first question which all students can see on your screen, the difference between goods and services. So whenever a question is asked to differentiate between two things, it always has to be answered in tabular format. Now on the screen, you can clearly see that we are looking at the difference between goods and services. The first point which students can see, that goods are tangible. You can see them, you can touch them. Okay, so all the commodities, all the physical commodities are tangible. You can see them, you can touch them, you can buy them, you can sell them. On the other hand, services are intangible. They cannot be seen and they cannot be touched. So goods are also produced, services are also produced. The only difference is goods can be seen and touched, services are intangible. You cannot see them, you cannot touch them. Let's look at the second difference. This was the first difference. Let's look at the second difference. Consumption of goods can be separated from the place of production and can be separated in time. Now, what does this mean? This means it is not necessary for the place of production and consumption to be the same in the case of goods. That means goods might be produced at some place but might be consumed at some other place. I hope students have understood this. This means it is completely possible for a good to be produced at one place but consumed at another place. Not only that, goods can also be separated in time. They can also be separated in time. Now, what does that mean? It is completely possible for a good to be produced today but consumed tomorrow. That means you can separate it in time. It is not necessary for the good which is produced today to be consumed today itself. Not all goods are like that. Some commodities might have this particular characteristic that if they are produced today, they must be consumed today itself. But most of the commodities which are produced for consumption, they might be produced today, but you can even consume them tomorrow. You can store them and you can consume them tomorrow. Example, milks, fruits and vegetables. They are produced on one day, but you are consuming them on a later date. On the other hand, if we talk about services, services should be used at the time and place in which they are produced. That means when we talk about services, you cannot separate them on the basis of place and time. That means a service has to be consumed only at the point of production. It cannot happen that a service is produced somewhere and consumed somewhere else. For example, if someone is providing you with transportation service or education service, the point at which the service is produced is the same point at which the service is consumed. And you cannot separate services on the basis of time. Now, what does that mean? It is not possible that a service is produced today but consumed tomorrow. Obviously, there exist some exceptions because of the latest technology which is coming up, but services cannot be stored. You cannot store a service. Example, if we talk about banking services. Now, banking services have to be consumed at the point where they are produced. It cannot happen that banking service is produced at one point and consumed at another point. Similarly, you cannot separate banking services on the basis of time. So I hope students have all understood the second difference between goods and services. If I repeat it again, when I talk about goods, you can separate them. You can separate the point of consumption from point of production. Goods might be produced at one point but consumed at another point. Or I can say goods might be produced at one location, but they may be consumed at some other location. This is not true for services. Services are all mostly consumed only at the point where they are produced. That means in case of services, you cannot differentiate the place of production from place of consumption. In case of services, place of consumption will happen only at the place of production only. And another thing is, in case of goods, you can separate them on the basis of time. That means a good which is produced today might be consumed tomorrow or even day after. On the other hand, services, when produced, have to be consumed at the same point of time. You cannot separate services on the basis of time. So hoping all students have understood the second point. Okay, moving forward, let's look at the third difference between goods and services. So there is a time gap between production and consumption of goods. First, goods are produced and then they are consumed. That means when we talk about goods, there exists a time lag between when these goods are produced and when these goods are available for final consumption by the consumer. Okay, so but in the case of services, there is no time gap between production and consumption of services, as both are taking place at the same point of time simultaneously. So I hope students have understood the third difference. When we talk of goods, usually they are produced at one point of time, but they are consumed later. So there is a time gap. But in the case of services, the point at which a service is produced is the same point at which a service is consumed. There is no time gap between production and consumption of services. Okay, then let's look at the fourth difference between goods and services. So on your screen, we had just done the third difference. Let's look at the fourth difference. Fourth difference is as follows. Goods can be stored. You can store goods in godowns, in refrigerators. And since you can store goods, you can consume them at a later date. Services, you cannot store them. Most of the services cannot be stored. Okay, so that means since you cannot store services, services have to be consumed at the same time when they are produced. On the other hand, since you can store goods, you can consume them later as compared to the time when they were produced. Okay, let's look at the fifth point. Goods are counted at the point of production. So when we measure how much quantity of goods are produced, we count them at the point of production. But when we talk of services, you count services when they are rendered, when they are offered. So I hope all students have understood the fifth difference. Goods are counted when produced. Services are counted when rendered or when offered. So hoping that students have understood the fifth difference between them. Moving on. So these are the 5 key differences between goods and services. So I hope all students have understood question 1. Now let's look at question 2 of the lecture note. What is meant by intermediate goods? So as you can see on your screen, intermediate goods are those goods that are used to produce other goods, and therefore they always move from one stage of production to another in manufacturing of a final good. So when we talk of intermediate goods, these are those goods which are not meant for final consumption. These are those goods which are used to produce other goods. And intermediate goods will completely lose their existence once they are transformed into the final good. So this is what is meant by the line that intermediate goods always move from one stage of production to another. Now, since intermediate goods are moving from one stage of production to another, they completely lose their individual existence. For example, if I talk about a chair is a final commodity bought by the consumer. Now, chair is made from wood. Now, what is wood? Wood is an intermediate good. Wood is an intermediate good. Why? Because wood is used to make chair, and when the chair is made, wood has completely lost its individual existence. Or I can say, when wood is used to make chair, wood is moving from one stage of production to another. Since wood is used to make chair, wood is moving from one stage of production to another. That means wood is undergoing change. Chair is not undergoing any change because chair is the final good which the consumer will buy. But wood is used to make chair, so wood is an intermediate good. Okay, hoping all students have understood this. Now the point is, should we add intermediate goods to national income? So intermediate goods are not included. Intermediate goods are not included in estimating national income. Why? Because if you are adding the intermediate good in calculating national income, you are creating the problem of double counting. You are creating the problem of double counting. Because when you are counting the value of the final good in calculating national income, that value of the final good automatically includes the value of the intermediate good. So if I talk about chair, suppose a chair is produced, I will only add chair in calculating national income. Why? Because that chair automatically includes the wood. If I also add the value of wood I have used in calculating national income, that will lead to the problem of double counting. So if I come to the whiteboard to explain this concept in the form of an example, so students can see, suppose I have wood and wood is used to make chair. Now all of us know, we have just learned that wood is an intermediate good. Intermediate goods are used to make other goods and services, and they completely lose their existence in the production process as they get transformed from one level of production to another. Chair, on the other hand, is a final good available for consumption by the consumer. Now suppose wood worth rupees 100 is used to produce a chair, and chair is sold in the market. Chair is sold in the market for rupees 250. Suppose this wood is used to make chair. The value of the wood is 100 rupees, and the chair which is produced from this wood is sold in the market for 250 rupees. Now, when I talk about national income, in national income, what should be included? In calculating national income, in national income calculation, we will only include the value of the chair worth rupees 250, because it automatically includes the value of wood worth rupees 100. If we also include wood worth rupees 100 in national income, then we are taking the value of wood twice. We are taking the value of wood twice. This creates a problem of double counting. This creates a problem of double counting. So I hope students have understood this example and explanation. So suppose if I have to decide from this example, what should be included in national income? In national income, we should only include the value of the final commodity, which in this case is chair, worth rupees 250. Because this 250 rupees automatically includes the value of the wood, which is 100 rupees. If you separately add 100 rupees worth of wood in national income, it will create a problem of double count. So hoping students have understood this and have no doubts. Coming back to the lecture note. Now we can quickly see what are meant by final goods. So final goods are those goods that are meant for final use by the consumers or the firms. Now final goods are not only bought by the consumers, final goods can also be bought by the firms. Okay, so these goods are not required to enter into further stages of production, unlike the intermediate goods, or resale to change their form and content. Now, what is this line telling us? It is telling us that unlike intermediate goods, final goods are not transformed from one stage of production to another. Okay, and unlike the intermediate goods, final goods are only meant for final use either by the consumer or by the firms. They are finished goods meant only for final consumption and investment. So final goods can be used for consumption also, and final goods can be used for investment also. Now, final goods which are used for consumption are called consumer goods. Final goods used for investment are called capital goods. We had learned this in our lectures on circular flow of income and product. If you all can recall, in our lectures on circular flow of income and product, we had learned the difference between consumption goods and capital goods. So final goods which are meant for consumption by the households are called consumption goods. Final goods which are meant for investment by the firms are called capital goods. And since final goods are to be added in national income, so we will add consumption goods also, we will add investment or capital goods also to national income. Why? Because both of these are final goods. So you can see the next line, students. Measurement of GDP includes only the aggregate value of the final goods. Aggregate means the total value of the final goods. Okay. For example of final goods would be bread, sugar. Now bread and sugar are recalled from my lectures on circular flow of income and product. Bread and sugar are durable, non-durable consumer goods. Bread, sugar, milk, fruits, vegetables, these are non-durable consumer goods. They are not long-lasting. You cannot store them for longer periods of time. On the other hand, buildings, machineries, these are capital or investment goods because buildings, machineries are further used to make other goods and services. Okay, so buildings, machineries, auto, all of these are capital goods. These can be consumption goods like food, clothing consumed by the consumer, or capital goods like machine tools used to produce other commodities. So hoping students have understood what is meant by final goods. Those goods which are available for final use by either the consumer or the firms. Final goods do not transform from one stage of production to another. They are finished goods. Okay, and they are included in our calculation of national income. So if I quickly come to the whiteboard and explain this, when we talk of final goods are counted in national income. That means when we are calculating national income, we add final goods. Okay. Final goods can further be classified into two parts: consumption goods and capital goods. Consumption goods and capital goods. Consumption goods are those goods that are meant for final consumption by the consumers. Those goods which are meant for final consumption by the consumers. Example: milk, fruits, vegetables, okay, etc. Capital goods are those goods which are used by the firms to produce other goods and services. Capital goods are those goods which are used by the firms to produce other goods and services. Example: machinery, plants and equipments. Machinery, plants and equipments, buildings, etc. Students should know that capital goods are also called investment goods. Why are they called investment goods? Because they are used by the firm only for investment purposes. That means to produce other goods and services. So I hope students have understood the difference between consumption goods and capital goods, and both of these, this and this, both of them are final goods which are counted in national income. Okay, and then let's quickly look at the next particular question in our lecture note. Then students can quickly see the difference. I'll quickly go over the difference between intermediate and final goods because students already know the difference between them. So it's a revision for all of us. So intermediate goods are those goods which are meant for further production or for resale in the same year. Final goods are those goods which are used either for final consumption or for capital formation or investment. Now, investment is also called capital formation. Okay, this is the first point of difference between intermediate and final goods. Second difference: intermediate goods remain within the production boundary or production process. That means intermediate goods are not crossing the production boundary. Intermediate goods will keep on transforming themselves within the production boundary. But which are the goods which will cross the production boundary and go to the consumers? The final goods. So final goods will ultimately cross the production boundary and they will go to the consumers. Intermediate goods are never directly going to the consumers. Intermediate goods will keep on transforming themselves within the production process. But final goods are going to cross the production process and reach the consumers for consumption. or firms for investment. So I hope second difference is clear. Third difference, these goods are not included in GDP. GDP stands for gross domestic product. Now we will be doing this later also, but students should know that GDP is the market value of the final goods and services produced within the domestic territory of a country in a given accounting year. When we talk of GDP, it is the market value of the final goods and services produced in the economy within a given accounting year. So GDP is similar to national income, but students need to understand that GDP is not exactly equal to national income. What is exactly national income and how do we measure it? We will come to it in our coming lectures. For right now, you can think of GDP as the market value of the final goods and services produced within the domestic territory of the country in a given accounting year. And intermediate goods are not included in GDP to avoid the problem of double counting, which we have learned. Final goods are, however, included in the GDP. Okay, if we quickly look at the example, okay, if we look at the example of this, so what is the example? Let's look at the example, guys. So the example you can see on your screen, which is the fourth point. Wood in the manufacturing of furniture is an intermediate good. This is the example which I had taken on the whiteboard also. Wood which is used to manufacture furniture is an intermediate good. Furniture is a final good, but wood is an intermediate good. Final goods would be furniture, house, machines, all food items for final consumption. All of these are final goods. Okay, so students, this is where I intend to stop in this particular lecture of national income measurement by product method. What we have covered in this lecture are 4 questions from my lecture note. Difference between goods and services. What is meant by intermediate goods? What is meant by final goods? The difference between intermediate goods and final goods. So I hope all students have understood these 4 questions. We will start from question 5. What are non-market goods or non-market activities? We'll start from this question in our next lecture of national income. So this is where I intend to stop in this particular lecture. I hope all students have enjoyed this lecture. Any doubt, you can unmute your mics and ask, or you can call up or mail me your doubts at divineschooloфeconomics@gmail.com. So this is where I stop in this particular lecture.